Genesis 3 is arguably the most influential single chapter in the entire Western literary tradition. Up until this point, Genesis 1 and 2 have been a masterclass in order, beauty, and absolute harmony. Humans in perfect sync with God, nature, and each other. Genesis 3 is a catastrophic turning point where all that shatters. It provides the why for all the pain, suffering, and tragedy in the rest of human history. Jeez. To get the most out of it as you read it, keep this crucial cultural literary context in the back of your mind. Keep in mind the last verse of chapter 2, and they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. In Hebrew culture, nakedness without shame symbolized total vulnerability, innocence, and complete trust. There were no walls up, no self-defense mechanisms, and nothing to hide. Genesis 3 opens up against this backdrop of pure innocence, introducing a force that's going to weaponize that vulnerability. Wow. All right, let's break into Genesis 3. All right, Genesis 3, the fall. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Whoa. This breaks it down before I even asked it. Who is the serpent? When modern readers open Genesis 3, they immediately think that's Satan or that's the devil. But if you read the text strictly on its own terms, the word Satan never appears in the text. The textual contents, the textual context. The narrator introduces the creature simply as a more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. It is framed as a part of the created order, but one that possesses a crafty, deceptive intelligence. The wordplay. In Hebrew, the word for naked, arumin, and the word for crafty/subtle is arum. The author is using a brilliant linguistic echo. The humans are arum, naked and vulnerable, and the creature is arum, shrewd and crafty. Wow, so they mean one and the same, naked and vulnerable, or shrewd and crafty. Later context. While later biblical tradition and Western literature, like Milton's Paradise Lost, identifies this serpent as an embodiment of spiritual evil or Satan, the immediate story presents it as a visual symbol of chaos and deception invading paradise. Wow, that's crazy. All right. Psychology of the temptation. Watch the dialogue carefully. When the serpent speaks to Eve, he doesn't tell a flat out lie first. He uses a masterclass in psychological manipulation. He asks, Ye hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? The trap. God had actually given them an incredibly generous boundary. They could not eat from every single tree except one. The serpent subtly twists the narrative to make God look stingy, restrictive, and withholding. He shifts their focus away from the 99% abundance and hyper focuses them on the 1% restriction. The core temptation is not just about eating fruit, it's about autonomy. The serpent tells them that if they eat it, they will be like God, knowing good and evil. In the ancient world, knowing good and evil didn't just mean knowing right from wrong. It meant deciding what is good and what is evil for oneself, independent of God. The anatomy of the collapse. All right, we're getting into that. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and the tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together, and made themselves aprons. And they heard the voice of the Lord God walking into the garden in the cool of the day. Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God amongst the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I hear thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. And he said, Who told thee thou wast naked? Hast thou eaten of the tree where I commanded thee that shouldn't not eat? And the man said, The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. And the Lord God said unto the woman, What is this that thou hast done? And the woman said, The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt go, and dust shalt eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise thy heel. Unto thee, woman, he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Wow, that's deep. And the Lord God said unto the serpent, Because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle, and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly thou shalt go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, All right. The anatomy of the collapse. As you read through verses 7 through 13, notice the immediate domino effect of their choice. The moment they cross the boundary, the world fractures into a very specific sequence. Psychological, internal shame. They realize that they are naked and they hide themselves. Theological, broken relationship with God. They hear him walking and run away. And relational, blame shifting. Adam blames Eve and God for making her. Eve blames the serpent. Oh man, this is like a masterclass in accountability. It's like Adam took upon the fruit with his own choice, right? And God for making her. Oh my gosh. The curse is an act is The curse is actually a mirror. At the end of the chapter, God pronounces the consequences. Pay close attention here. God doesn't arbitrarily invent random punishments. Instead, the consequences perfectly match the crime. Because humans tried to rule independently of God, the fundamental relationship of their lives became strained and difficult. The ground in which Adam was supposed to easily cultivate will now fight back with thorns and thistles. Childbirth, the ultimate expression of life and partnership, will be mixed with deep pain. It is a portrait of the world knocked completely off its axis. Wow. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise thy heel. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. This is crazy. You've just arrived at what the theologians call the watershed moment of the biblical narrative. Genesis 3:15 and 16 represent the exact moment where the reality of human existence shifts from paradise to the broken, gritty world we all live in today. These two verses set up the core conflicts that drive the plot of the entire rest of the Old and New Testaments. Here's the deep context behind these intense lines. Genesis 3:15, the first gospel. This verse is directed at the serpent, and it's widely considered the most complex prophetic verse in the entire book of Genesis. Scholars call this verse the Protoevangelium, which translates directly to the first gospel or the first good news. Even though God is pronouncing a curse on the serpent, he's simultaneously giving a hidden promise to the rescue of humanity. Look closely at the mechanism of the conflict he sets up. Their eternal war, God sets up a permanent battle between the seed, descendants of the serpent, symbolizing deception, chaos, and evil, and the seed of the woman, humanity. Asymmetrical wound, the serpent will strike the seed's heel, a painful, debilitating injury, but not necessarily fatal. But the seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head, a definitive, lethal blow that destroys the creature entirely. So, is it saying that humans will bruise the head of the serpent, and the serpent shall bruise the heel long term? To the ancient Israelites, this explained why life felt like a constant tug of war between good and evil, and why humans have naturally aversion to snakes. However, later messianic traditions, especially in Christian theology, this verse is viewed as the first prophecy of the Messiah. It points forward to a single specific male descendant of the woman who would take a fatal-looking strike from evil, the crucifixion, but use that very moment to completely crush the head of the ultimate enemy. Genesis 3:16. Now the lens turns to the woman. In the original design of Genesis 2, the relationship between man and woman was beautiful, egalitarian partnership of one flesh. Verse 16 describes how the introduction of human selfishness and autonomy completely disrupts that design. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. The Hebrew word for sorrow here is istanbon. Forgive me. It does not mean emotional sadness. It means intense, agonizing physical labor and toil. This is a powerful literary symmetry here. The woman's core unique power, bringing forth new human life, is now fundamentally tangled up with pain. And in the very next verse, the man's core unique duty, cultivating life from the soil, is met with the exact same Hebrew word, istabon. Istasbon. As he told, he will toil in sorrow to get food from the ground. Thy desire shall be thy husband, and he shall rule over you. The final phrase is heavily misunderstood in modern times, but the ancient linguistic context clearly clears it up. The word desire, the Hebrew word is teshuach. Forgive me. It doesn't mean a romantic or sexual desire. In the context of ancient Hebrew literature, it means a desire to overcome, master, or control. We know this because the exact same word is used just one chapter later in Genesis 4:7, when God tells Cain that sin's desire is to master him, but he must rule over it. When God tells Cain that sin's desire is to master him, but he must rule over it. The power struggle. What God is describing here is not a command, but is a diagnosis of a broken world. He's saying, because you have walked away from my design, your relationship is going to descend into a bitter power struggle. Your instinct will be to control and manipulate your husband, and his instinct will be to harshly dominate and rule over you. Wow, that is crazy. I just got to read that again. So, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise thy heel. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. What God is describing here is not a command, but a diagnosis of the broken world. He's saying, because you have walked away from my design, your relationship is going to descend into a bitter power struggle. Your instinct will be to control and manipulate your husband, and his instinct will be to harshly dominate and rule over you. The big picture, Genesis 3:15 through 16, is showing that the ripple effect of human choice immediately corrupted the two most fundamental parts of human existence: our relationship with the spiritual world, the war with the serpent, and our relationship with each other, the battle of the sexes. From this verse forward, the biblical story becomes a rescue mission to get humanity back to the unity and peace they lost. Oh my gosh. That's crazy. This like really sums it up. You know, I can can definitely see the desire between both sexes. Just kind of summed up perfectly Genesis 3:16. Unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply sorrow and thy conception, and in sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And it's saying the woman's instinct will be to control and manipulate her husband, and his instinct will be to harshly dominate and rule over. Wow. Now it's time for what he did to Adam and mankind, what he did to the man. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten from the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow thou shalt eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread. Thou shalt, or till thou return unto the ground. And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow thou shalt eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread till thou return unto the ground, for out of it was thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. And Adam called his wife Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skin and clothe them. And Adam called his wife's name Eve, because she was the mother of all living. Unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothe them. Wow. Now we've arrived at the third and final verdict in the courtroom of Genesis 3. God had sentenced the serpent, diagnosed the broken dynamics of the woman's future, and now he turns his focus directly to Adam. Just like the verses before it, this passage is an absolute masterpiece of literary symmetry, wordplay, and ancient cultural resonance. To fully grasp what's happening here, let's break down the deeper context line by line. God starts the sentence by laying out the exact nature of Adam's failure. Because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree. To modern ears, this can sound like God's upset that Adam listened to his spouse, but in the ancient Near Eastern context, this is about the breakdown of the divine order. In Genesis 2, God gave the explicit command about the tree directly to Adam before Eve was even created. Adam's specific job was to guard the garden and uphold that boundary. When the moment of testing came, Adam wasn't tricked by the serpent. The text tells us he was standing right there with her. He chose to passively stay silent, ignore the voice of God, and follow along. God is calling him out for abandoning his primary responsibility. This is where the Hebrew language makes the context come alive. Remember that the man's name is Adam because he was made from the ground, Adahim. God says, "Cursed is the ground for thy sake." Oh man, notice that God does not curse Adam himself. He curses the serpent and he curses the ground, but the humans are spared a direct curse. Instead, Adam's consequence is that his relationship with his mother element, the dirt he came from, is now fundamentally broken. In Genesis 2, Adam's job was to dress and keep a lush, naturally abundant, cooperative garden. It was full of joy, partnership with the earth. In Genesis 3, the ground goes to war with him. It becomes stubborn. It actively resists his efforts by pushing forward thorns and thistles. The shared consequence to toil and sorrow. As we saw in previous verses with the woman, the Hebrew word used here for how Adam will eat from the ground is istaban, meaning a painful toil to bring forth food and sustenance from the earth. This text is demonstrating a total equality in the consequences of the fall. Both man and woman experience a corruption of their primary life-giving vocations. For Adam, survival is no longer a matter of reaching out and plucking fruit from a tree of abundance. It is now to require sweat of his face just to produce a basic loaf of bread. The ultimate reality check, dust to dust. The climax of God's speech to Adam is one of the most famous poetic lines in history. It serves as the ultimate reality check. Till thou return unto the ground, for out of it was thou taken. For dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. When Adam ate the fruit, the serpent's big promise was, "Ye shall be as gods." The desire was to climb up, achieve immortality, and achieve ultimate autonomy. God's final verdict completely crushes that illusion. He reminds Adam of his atomic reality. He essentially says, "You want to be God? Look at your feet. You are dirt. You came from dirt. You are going to spend the rest of your life sweating and fighting the dirt just to stay alive. Eventually, the dirt is going to win and swallow you back up." Oh man. Humans are now mortal, fragile, self-conscious, and forced into a hostile world where survival requires grueling effort. The very next thing that happens in the text are Adam and Eve getting evicted from the garden. Oh, that's too funny. All right, back to it. And Adam called his wife Eve, and because she was the mother of all living, unto Adam also and to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothe them. And the Lord God said, "Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever." Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the garden Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword, to which he turned every way to keep the way of the tree. of life. I need some more context. All right. This is the dramatic closing scene of Genesis 3. The courtroom trial is over. Sentences have been passed, and now comes the execution of the sentence, eviction. Fully understand why God drives them out, and what these strange elements like cherubims and a flaming sword actually mean. We have to look through the eyes of the ancient Near Eastern reader. Why the eviction is actually an act of mercy. On the surface, driving man and women out of the garden looks like pure punishment. But if you read the verse immediately before this one, Genesis 3:22, God reveals a surprising protective motive. He says, "Lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever." Thinking about the nightmare scenario that would create, humanity had just fractured its own nature, becoming selfish, prone to violence, full of shame, and broken in their relationships. If they were to eat from the tree of life in that corrupted state, they would make their brokenness eternal. They would be trapped forever in a state of living death with no possibility of change, growth, or rescue. By removing them from the tree, God allows humans to remain mortal. Death is painful, but in the grand arc of the Bible, it becomes the very thing that allows human beings to be reset, redeemed, and eventually restored. Wow, that is awesome. If they were to eat from the tree of life in that corrupted state, they would make their brokenness eternal. They would be trapped forever in a state of living death with no possibility of change, growth, or rescue. By removing them from the tree of life, God allows humans to remain mortal. Death is painful, but in the grand arc of the Bible, it becomes the very thing that allows human beings to be reset, redeemed, and eventually restored. Wow, I didn't really grasp that from reading it. Who and what are the cherubims? When modern readers hear the word cherubim, they actually picture a chubby white-winged Cupid-like baby floating on clouds. In the ancient world, a cherubim, plural cherubim, was the exact opposite. They were terrifying, massive, majestic hybrid creatures. In ancient Babylonian, Assyrian, and Egyptian cultures, royal palaces and temples were guarded by these statues called Lamassu, or sphinxes, creatures with the body of a lion or bull, the wings of an eagle, and the head of a human. In the ancient mind, cherubim were the elite security forces of the cosmos. They didn't strum harps, they guarded the thrones of kings and the boundary lines where the divine met the earthly. By placing cherubims at the gate, the text is saying that Eden is God's private royal place, and humanity has officially lost its security clearance. The flaming sword in the direction of exile. The text notes that God placed the cherubim and the flash of a turning flaming sword at the east of the garden. In Genesis, east is almost always a direction of exile, separation from God, and trouble. When Adam and Eve leave, they go east. When Cain kills Abel later, he moves further east to the land of Nod. When humanity builds the Tower of Babel, they travel east. Moving east means moving away from the presence of God. The turning sword, the Hebrew description, implies a weapon that is spinning or flashing dynamically on its own, creating an impenetrable, multi-directional barrier. Humanity cannot sneak, fight, or bargain their way back into paradise. The door is slammed, locked, and heavily guarded. For the ancient Israelites, reading this text century later, this verse hit them with an incredible flash of recognition. When God gave Moses the blueprints to build the tabernacle and later Solomon's temple, guess what was switched all over the curtains, guarding the Holy of Holies, the place where God's presence lived, the cherubim. Furthermore, the entrance of the tabernacle and the temple always faced east. When a priest walked past the eastern gate, past the embroidered cherubim, and into the sacred space to meet with God, he was literally retracing the steps of Adam, symbolically stepping backwards past the guards and into the lost Garden of Eden. The stage is set for chapter 4, with the final verse. Genesis 3 closes the door on the idyllic beginning of the human story, and the transition is absolute. Wow, crazy.